Hogging the headlines of late, Malawi's main opposition party members took to the streets to celebrate following the country's constitutional court ruling to annul the May 2019 presidential vote. On Monday, a panel of judges ruled unanimously for new elections to be held within 150 days, a verdict welcomed by the opposition.
Last year's election declared Peter Mutharika a winner, but the court has ordered a rerun after an application from opposition parties citing irregularities. Mutharika, who has been president since 2014, won the election with a 38.6% share of the vote, with opposition party leader Lazarus Chakwera getting 35.4% and Deputy President Saulos Chilima, who formed his own party, with 20.2% in the final tally. Mutharika was declared winner despite complaints of irregularities. The court said the 2019 outcome could not be trusted to represent the will of the people, and also criticized the conduct of the Electoral Commission, which is said was very lacking and demonstrated incompetence.
So, as you heard, Malawi is heading to the polls again. This follows that landmark constitutional court ruling which nullified the results of the May 2019 presidential elections. The panel of 5 judges found what it termed serious irregularities. What does this ruling tell us about the state of democracy on the African continent? Let's bring in Grant Masterson. He is the program manager for the African Peer Review Mechanism at the Electoral Institute of Southern Africa. Grant, appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Nice to be here.
So, fresh elections in Malawi, annulling the results of an elections. How much of a slap in the face is that for both the electoral body as well as observer missions?
Yeah, look, I think that what we have here is the second time on the continent that a court has set aside an election. And the reasons are specifically in these cases because the administrative processes were not followed according to the law. And I think that the fact that the courts have gone this far in Malawi as well as in Kenya in 2017, which was the previous occasion when the court set aside an election, it's really raising the standard for what is acceptable for an election body to deliver on the election promises that they make. So I think in one sense we need to see this as a very positive development, because the courts are now demanding that there is a basic standard that has to be met.
But you had the likes of the European Union's election observation mission there. You had the Commonwealth Observer Group, which was led by former President of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, and at the time, I remember he was quoted in the press as saying, well, they were still, monitoring the elections, but he was saying that so far the elections was handled with professionalism and dedication. I mean, what I'm trying to get is that in terms of observer missions there, how easy or difficult is it to hoodwink, for example, observers?
Well, the statements that you're referring to from the Commonwealth, from the European Union, the African Union and others were very explicit that they were dealing with the matters up to and including the election day. What the trouble is, not just for observers, but really for all monitors, is that the process which the courts have said didn't meet the standards that the MEC as the election body needed to meet occurred during the counting and the results tabulation. Now, those processes take weeks sometimes, and unfortunately, for some fairly good reasons, access by third parties to that process is severely limited, which obviously provides a lot of range and a lot of scope for, as you put it, persons who want to hoodwink the results of an election. Which is why I think that these judgments by the courts are very important in that regard, because the courts do have the authority and the jurisdiction to step into that space and to determine whether or not the proper procedures are actually proposed.
Reportedly, this was a 6-month-long hearing. The verdict was around 500 pages or so.
I'm still reading it right now.
What legal options does Peter Mutharika have now, considering this was a ruling from the Apex Court?
Yeah, this is interesting. We don't have a lot of precedents. We have no precedent in Malawi, and of course the Malawi legal system is the primary legal system we need to consider. But even on the continent, we have almost no legal precedent for this type of thing. What the courts have done is they have reset the state of the country to the way it was the day before the elections, which means that they have effectively fired the current parliament, they've fired the current vice president. President Mutharika was the president in the previous term, so he retains his position, but he retains it on the old mandate. And very interesting, the former vice president and one of the applicants in the case has been reinstalled as vice president. During the past term, he was the vice president and he ran on his own ticket in this election. We don't have a lot of precedent. We don't know if there is an appeals process here, but what we do know is that we are supposed to have elections in the next 150 days.
Right.
That's going to be extremely challenging to deliver on. What we saw in Kenya was that the second election had a whole host of new challenges to overcome simply because of the judgment that struck down the first one.
Two issues. Does this, in part, give observer missions a second chance in order to, dig a little deeper? And what sort of message does this ruling send to the continent?
Yeah, well, on the message, I think it's very positive. I think the people of Malawi are asserting their own ownership of their elections. For observers, I think that it's back to the drawing board. They've got to look at how they are dealing with this post-election area, because it's becoming the area which needs to be observed, and observers are not finding ways at the moment to get eyes and ears into the right places to actually monitor those processes.
What about the dawn, I guess, of social media and fake news, so to speak, disinformation? This is a new area of work, isn't it, for observers? How do they navigate through this?
The election space changes all the time, and always those who try and monitor it and try and assess it are always trying to play catch up, because there are new developments, new trends, new ways of campaigning, and also, unfortunately, new mechanisms and new methods of trying to defraud election results. So international observation is always trying to catch up. And of course, it makes this space very dynamic and very interesting. But of course, I think that what we accept from the Malawi example is international observers need to move faster.
Yeah. All right, Grant, thank you very much indeed for your time. Appreciate you coming in, explaining and get your perspective on this very important issue. That was Grant Masterson, Program Manager for African Peer Review Mechanism at the Electoral Institute of Southern Africa. We're going to take a quick break. Let me remind you, though, about our question of the day. And we're asking you, what do you make of the recent developments in the Jacob Zuma case? The fact that he was issued with a warrant of arrest